Today we're going to be going over 4 things that every Commander deck needs to have.
I'm Mia, and I'm sitting on multiple booster seats right now.
I'm BZ. I'm not doing that. We're the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by Card Kingdom. You cannot buy booster seats on Card Kingdom, but you can buy cards. That's probably what you're more interested in. Magic the Gathering cards, even.
I'm pretty sure if you search booster seats, you'll actually get booster packs, but you can get those on Card Kingdom too. Some are at a discount right now, so go check them out. Use our link in the description. Tell them we sent you. We'd really appreciate that. We're also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you want 5% of your order off using the code
Nerds,
you can use that at dragonshield.com.
we're also sponsored by Moxfield, but you're going to hear from them later in the video when we surprise you out of nowhere with our ad skills.
Because you're a liar. And we also have a Patreon where you can go support the channel and you can get deck audits by us because we don't do those live anymore. We have a podcast and we have a bunch of other things. So go check it out and it would really mean the world to us. And if you want to support the channel in other ways, we are doing our first merch drop. We're super excited to announce it. We're doing playmats and they're really, really cute. And one of them is Miso as the Displacer Kitten. Look at him. He's adorable.
Yes.
And he's not that smart.
This is our first ever Nitpicking Nerds playmat. We have Miso and we have Amber as Queen Marchesa, which is just literally the cutest thing ever. I'm going to die because it's so cute. And we've got them coming out, plus another mat with the Nitpicking Nerds logo on it. They're going to be coming out on Whatnot. We are doing, this is it. This is, you got to write this down in your calendar. Thursday, May 2nd at 8 p.m. This is the merch drop. We are going to be selling 100 of each of these mats signed by the cats. You can see the paw print on Amber's mat. If not, the editor's got you. I'm going to zoom in on it. And Miso's as well. Serialized also. Those are going to be the only 100 of each mat that you can get that's signed and serialized by the cat. I'm so excited. All of the money from this drop is going to go back into the channel to help with things like editing costs and just to, so we're working on gameplay too to help make gameplay happen.
We're really excited about this and this helps the cats go to college. And this is our first merch drop. Come celebrate with us on Whatnot. We're really, really happy and really excited for you to be there.
Thursday, May 2nd, 8 p.m. But today, like we said earlier, we're going over 4 things, a little checklist that every single Commander deck needs. I think Commander decks don't play enough of these. And no, we're not just going to be talking about ramp removal, card draw. You know, it's more specific than that.
Commander games are not always fair. There's like arch enemy situations. There are things that counter your deck's like idea completely, but we can swing them a little bit more in our favor with these 4 things. The first one is one-sided board wipes. Why? Because the board can get really, really clogged, and having only symmetrical board wipes slows you down just as much as it slows your opponents down, and we want to be ahead of them at all given times.
Yes, it's good to play board wipes in your deck. You know, a lot of people are talking about, 2 to 4 board wipes or something, but it is very widespread, the complaints people have of like playing an hour or 2-hour game. That's because people only play symmetrical board wipes. Having extra board wipes, maybe we play 1 symmetrical board wipe in our deck, but then the other 1 or 2 that we have are asymmetrical. They are in our favor. They leave us very far ahead when we cast them. Sure, they might be a couple extra mana. Sure, they might have synergy with our deck and they can't just be played anywhere in any deck, but this is a huge difference and it changes the outcome of games all the time.
I think it's really good to build around your deck in a more thematic way too. It makes you kind of consider the cards you're throwing in and not just throwing in only the EDH most like played version of that card, because while there are really good symmetrical board wipes, like for Farewell, for instance, one of my favorites, it's not always good at every point in the game.
Yeah, these symmetrical board wipes, they slow the game down, like I said, and that's the reason that you play 2-hour games. But when you play an asymmetrical board wipe, you get build momentum because your board doesn't go anywhere or your board is largely unaffected. It just gives you tons of advantage and secret mode on every one-sided board wipe. Your creatures can attack unblocked that turn. Whatever you have in play is getting through because there's nothing to oppose you.
You should be playing about 1 to 2 of these. You can do a mix of asymmetrical and non-symmetrical ones. But the first one we're going to talk about is Winds of Abandon. 1 and a white for a sorcery. Exile target creature you don't control, and then they search for a basic land, they put it on the battlefield tapped and shuffle, but you can overload it for 4 white. So this is kind of like a Path to Exile impression, but it can do it for every creature you don't control, and it's exile too, which is super nice considering there's a lot of graveyard recursion.
There's a lot of good board wipes out there, but white is also a creature-heavy color, so throwing Vanquish the Horde, Farewell, Day of Judgment, Own to Inversion all into your deck at the same time is going to mean that every time you have to do this, everything gets reset and you can't build any momentum. But when we have cards like this, they're now like a finisher where I can say my board wipe, if I'm ahead, is going to win me the game, not reset me back to zero. So like, not only when we're playing these, are they not dead cards? This one actually happens to be spot removal as well, so it's extra not dead. But when we have them and we're winning, they are the things that puts us over the edge.
You're not even losing that much with this because most board wipes are sorcery speed only, so it's not like a timing thing. And a lot of decks nowadays just don't play that many basics unless they're monocolored decks. A lot of the 3, 4, and 5s are playing a lot of utility lands or multicolored lands, so they might not even have as many basics as this requires them or like allows them to get. You might be getting even more value than you think depending on how many colors the deck is playing.
Another one I like is Tragic Arrogance. This is a wipe that you get to choose all of the things that stay on board, so your opponents keep their worst permanent of each type, and you keep your best permanent of each type. This is probably the most one-sided in like Voltron decks or decks that are lighter on the board. You can leave them with tapped creatures. You can leave them with like an artifact creature, and that counts as artifact and creature. This thing just messes with the board and the resources so efficiently and so in your favor that I think it's still one of the best white board wipes that is just constantly underappreciated. But if you've got a creature that is huge by itself, some kind of big beater, or it's got one aura or one equipment on it, you can play Tragic Arrogance. Your stuff is mostly unaffected, and then you just take somebody out with it.
I love the creativeness with this, picking the sad robot to be the artifact and the creature. I think this is a really fun one, and I don't really see this that much in Commander. I really would like to, though.
It's actually brutal, and I love it. I love Tragic Arrogance. It feels one-sided every time. A classic one that you might know in the one-sided wipe category, Cyclonic Rift. It's an instant. Every blue deck pretty much plays this, and this is one that can extend the game, but you should still play it because one-sided board wipes are always good.
I mean, I feel like this is the quintessential one-sided board wipe. This is the one that everyone hates and the one that's being played. And this shows that no matter what, one-sided board wipes are really, really good. I think that the other ones just aren't played as much because of the timing restrictions, but that doesn't stop you from playing symmetrical ones. So why should that stop you from playing asymmetrical ones too?
Well, you mentioned timing restrictions. How about an instant? How about Perplexing Test? This is another instant in blue, and it bounces all tokens or all non-tokens. So the non-tokens, probably more of a hard symmetrical reset on creatures. But if you're a token deck and you go wide, you can fire this off end step even, or on your turn when you draw it, to just bounce all of their stuff. You keep all your tokens and then bash with them.
There's a lot of ways that blue-esque decks can make tokens, whether you're a Talrin deck or something that's really taking advantage of Young Peasy, or, blue-white tokens, which there are a fair amount of. So I think that this can find a home in a lot of decks. There's also Kindred Dominance, which kind of requires you to play a Kindred deck for the most part to get the full advantage. However, if you are playing this and you don't have a ton of creatures of a certain type out, you can still pick your best creature, pick that type, and the rest get blown up, which is not bad.
Yeah, this requires you to be playing a Kindred deck. You're in that deck, you're in black, and so I think this is a great option for those decks to close out the game instead of just playing Damnation, resetting everything, and figuring out how to rebuild. It's like, let me blow up all their stuff. They need to figure out how to spend an entire turn to rebuild. I will spend this turn attacking them, and then when I get to untap, I'm now way ahead still.
You might find that one or two of their creatures have survived. If you're playing vampires, maybe they had like a blood artist survive or something like that, like a little random thing. But you will have the best board overall by far. There's also Phyresis Outbreak, which is a poison-based one-sided board wipe. On all of the opponent's creatures get -1/-1 for each poison counter that they have. And it also gives them one, which I love about this, because it's a good way to get that poison ball rolling if you haven't started it already.
This is super specific, but I thought it was good to highlight just because decks that have these that are like go-tos, like the Infect deck, this makes the Infect deck like way stronger. The fact that you have to worry about one-sided board wipes, possibly multiples, because in an Infect deck, I could play Phyresis Outbreak, and I could play Winds of Abandon, and maybe I'm Atraxa, so I can play Cyclonic Rift too. It's like, you're just never going to have blockers for a deck that really, really wants to get combat damage in. It's huge.
I mean, it's the biggest point of an Infect deck. There are a couple cards like this, and Infectious Bite that give poison counters now that you don't need combat damage, but the meat and potatoes of a Infect deck is still through combat damage, so you really need to get rid of those blockers. Another one is Volcanic Torrent. This has to do with how many spells you've cast that turn. So in Cascade decks, or if you're just chaining like little cantrips, this can do a lot of damage to all of your opponent's creatures.
This card is an uncommon, still doesn't get enough love. I think it's very good. I think even just spending 5 to get a cascade trigger and deal, let's say, 3 damage to each creature your opponents control is still very, very strong. This scales up to a one-sided board wipe, but in Spellslinger decks, I think it's amazing. It's been so good for me to be able to crash in with the tokens that I make from like a young Pyromancer or something without having to worry about all my stuff getting swept up, because a lot of the blue-red board wipes just take out my stuff too. I don't really want to play Blasphemous Act if I can just, in a Spellslinger deck, have a bunch of stuff like Volcanic Torrent that doesn't even hit my creatures. The same is true of Immolating Gyre. It cares about the instants and sorceries in your graveyard. So as long as that number is like above 5, forget Blasphemous Act. Just destroy all their stuff, let them cry about it, and kill them right then.
It's so easy to get things off Immolating Gyre too, especially if you can play a ton of those spell slinging. But even if you have some sort of like someone made you mill a few cards, it's like, ooh, is that a downside? Because now this makes my things better. I think that this is pretty flexible because a lot of decks are playing a fair amount of instants and sorceries, regardless of whether they are a spell slinging deck or not. I would only play this in something with a high count of it. But I think in a pinch, even if you only had a couple in your graveyard because it was like early to mid game and you really need to sweep the board, this is a pretty good option. Azorius Predation, also a great one. We love that on this channel because it's the green board wipe, but you also get a bunch of 4/4s because it fights every creature too. You also might get a bunch of death triggers, which could be really nice for your deck.
And it doesn't fight your stuff. It doesn't care about your stuff at all. This is one-sided, only benefits you, and you also can play this on an empty board for yourself with only their stuff in play, to now wipe their stuff, and then for everything they had that was like 3 power or worse, you get to a beast that survives.
It also is, it seems like a lot of mana, but if you're in green, especially mono green, that doesn't really matter because you could get that, turn 5 or something? It's not that tough.
It's possible. I've definitely had games where I did almost nothing and then played Azorius Predation. Nobody had a board wipe for my board wipe, by the way, and then I won the game with my board wipe.
Another brutal one is Ruinous Ultimatum. Yeah, that looks like a lot of pips, and yeah, that does look scary, but the effect is so just backbreaking that most times people can't get past that if you have a even somewhat established board. You just like wiped out 5 turns of progress for them.
All their ramp, if they're non-green, all their mana rocks is gone, all their enchantment, all their setup, even their wild growths, enchanting their lands and mana dorks, they're all gone. This thing is brutal. It's so good that I've felt bad when casting it before, but I don't think that was right. I think you just need to cast this spell if you put it in your deck. And also, like, those games were high power, and everybody agreed to, Ruinous Ultimatum is not a pub stompy card, but it just feels so dang good.
I feel like you have to work for it too. There's no like easy way to cast this turn 3 unless you just somehow exploded with treasures or something like that.
There's also no reason to cast almost any board wipe on turn 3.
I know.
Anyway.
I'm just stating that I feel like Ruinous you have to work for a little bit, so I never feel too bad about doing it, especially if the board is very clogged.
We're going to move on to the second thing in our checklist that every commander deck needs, and that's Graveyard Hate. Graveyards are a resource nearly every deck can use, and I would almost venture out to say every deck, unless you are actively, some part of your game plan is to hate out graveyards. Every deck should be taking advantage of the graveyard in some way, and most do. Graveyard decks scale with the game in a way that other decks can't do, because as they lose more resources, it kind of just goes to second hand. It doesn't go to inaccessible zone. We've played against a lot of people who don't use the graveyard, and it's like, okay, well, when your stuff dies, it's dead. But if my stuff died and went to my hand still, I wouldn't really care. I wouldn't be out of gas, and graveyard decks just get more and more resources as the game goes on.
And I know a lot of people think, oh, Reanimate, Black, Green, Golgari, Abzan, Carador, those are very big graveyard strategies, but what about the flashback spells, the Savine's Reclamations, the Deep Analyses? There's usually at least some portion of the graveyard that people can use even if they're not in a dedicated graveyard deck. So Graveyard Hate can be very useful, especially if it can hit every single graveyard and not just one. But even if you can only take out one graveyard, that usually slows that player down quite a lot.
It can ruin their entire game. It doesn't, in the graveyard
decks,
would know. It will shut them down. A lot of different archetypes, like you said, have graveyard synergies, but a lot of different archetypes also have I win buttons. I don't know what else to call them. Cards that win the game by themselves in the late game just because they've played enough spells and they've milled, or the game has gone on long enough that their graveyard is full. Like, every archetype has this. Rise of the Dark Realms is kind of a generic one anyone can play. Living Death for graveyard decks, Wake the Past for artifact decks, Replenish for enchantment decks, and then Mizzix's Mastery for instant and sorcery decks. It's everywhere. Every single archetype basically can take advantage of a bring all my stuff back sorcery that now wins them the game on the spot. And if you don't have access to that stuff, if you're just playing like at a disadvantage. But having Graveyard Hate easily slottable into your deck, like the ones we're going to list, helps even that out.
Rise of the Dark Realms is so powerful. I've played that in a deck that wasn't a dedicated graveyard deck, and I've won on the spot because someone else just happened to mill their combo, and they went, oh, I guess you win now because there's both pieces onto your graveyard. Can't do anything about that. So it is important to be exiling those graveyards and making sure you take out key parts that might come into play later and really hurt you.
Yeah, how many graveyard decks would we recommend playing? Moxfield.com has the answer. You can go to Moxfield.com, you can build a deck, and you can tag all the cards with individual tags. And maybe I want to tag something with Graveyard Hate. Well, you can enter the tag, sort the cards by the tags, and see, oh, I've seen the Nitpicking Nerds video. They recommend 1 to 2 pieces of Graveyard Hate.
BZ asked you how many graveyard decks you should be playing, and he might say 27 because all of his are graveyard decks for the most part. But in general, you can be playing as many or as few as you want on Moxfield.com. But if we're talking about pieces of Graveyard Hate, it's about 1 to 2.
1 to 2 is our sweet spot. We got some examples. Soul Guide Lantern is a card that comes down, hates the best card out of a graveyard, exiles it right now, and then you can choose later to either for free exile their graveyards one-sided, keeping yours intact, or just crack it for a card if you don't need that, if you just need like card flow.
I mean, this comes down really cheap too. So in decks that really trigger off casting artifacts like a Layla, for instance, this could be a really good thing to bounce, like put out and sacrifice and then get back again for repeated graveyard hate. And then just in general, if you do need to exile the graveyards, I think it's very good to have sitting around because it's not like people are going to spot remove this. There's also Relic of Progenitus exiling everyone's graveyards. And so if you're not utilizing yours that much, it can really only hurt the other people because you probably don't have that much to get.
Yeah, and this one always replaces itself. So when you exile all graveyards, you get your card back all the time. Soul Guide Lantern is like, do you want to exile all graveyards or get your card back? Although it is one-sided, so that's like the trade-off there. Figure out which one's better for you, but they're both artifacts, and they both synergize with a lot of things. And also an artifact, actually, and an equipment, Lion Sash. Go get this with Stoneforge Mystic. If you have an equipment package, this is perfect. You go find it as like a toolbox hate piece, and now you can single target, shut down every targeted reanimator card, any flashback card someone has sitting in their graveyard this turn. You can just eat it right now and they can't use it. It's huge value. People get so annoyed by Lion Sash and its brother, Scavenging Ooze, the green version, which is great in your creature decks. It's just like, if you have these cards in play, they're continuous haters that kind of say no funny business while I'm out.
Lion Sash just makes your creature grow so big. Scavenging Ooze, it's so cheap to activate, and you just get ongoing value off of it. People just don't respect the scoozing that much, and people don't respect Lion Sash enough too. There, I said it.
All right, the next one is Remorseful Cleric. It's just a cheap flyer for those decks that care about evasion and maybe combat damage. It sits in play, and then when you need it the most, kind of for free, you can just sacrifice it and exile one player's whole graveyard. I think this sitting in play is also kind of a, hey, no funny business type deal. It can really offset a lot of key cards. A lot of the cards we mentioned above that are just I win buttons, they're not going to happen when Remorseful Cleric is in play. And if you can get this back, you can start hating out the same player's graveyard over the course of the game, or just taking out each individual one.
This really shuts down the, okay, I'll turbo mill and get back my graveyard back. Well, no, you won't. There's also Bojuka Bog stapled onto a land slot in black. I really like playing this. It always feels really good to just have that as a little bit of a utility land and just have it basically as a swamp for the rest of the game.
I think Mia goes a little hard on it. I'm pretty sure you play this in like 5-color decks. I would maybe stick to 3 or less colors for Bojuka Bog and then turn to maybe some of the other ones we're mentioning in this little block. But it's definitely good.
I think if you have a swamp in your deck, you can replace it with Bojuka Bog and you will be mostly okay, unless you're fetching for some reason. There's also Endurance. This is, you can pitch a green card and you can make them shuffle the graveyard back into their library. This is very good if you have, like, you're playing against Thassa's Oracle and stuff like that. Or just, if you have it for value, you could play it for its full cost and not have it die instantly.
It is well known for its ability to scale up to whatever power you're playing at. If you're playing at the highest level of power, it is good there. But I think it's also kind of underrated in just regular Commander. The surprise factor, a lot of these other ones, they stay on board. Soul Guide Lantern, it's known. Scavenging Ooze, it's known. This is like a weird instant that you can cast for free almost all the time. So when they try to go for something, you can get the thing out of their hand, flash it in, wreck their graveyard, and now their big spell that you were worried about, it's not stuck in their hand ready to be used later. It's gone. It's on the stack. It fizzles.
That is really good to have. And just, I really like the elementals, and they are dropping in price.
Yeah, it's kind of cheap.
I'm very surprised about that, but happy to see it because that means they're more playable in Commander now and just more decks in general.
Yeah, the next one I want to talk about because I love it so much is Ashiok Dreamrender. This is a Planeswalker. It stays in play. It's got a static to mill someone for 4, but then everybody who's your opponent's exiles their graveyard. You can mill yourself, keep it intact, or you can mill an opponent trying to hit something of theirs to ruin their deck or their day. And then the static ability that everybody forgets about, that I've never really seen work because everyone just tries to go takesies backsies, is that your opponents can't search their libraries. Everyone always like, my experience with Ashiok is somebody plays Cultivate, and then I'm like, okay. And then they're like, oh, wait, I don't want to play that. That's my experience. It doesn't actually stop it. It just says whatever spell goes back to their hand and they have to play something else.
I mean, reveal Cultivate, but Ashiok is better, in my opinion, in the higher power because in the lower power, it's just like, I don't know, just they're not searching for much. It's not as effective except for like the Cultivates, and then that feels kind of bad. But with Planeswalkers, I'd say this is one of the good ones, and I don't like Planeswalkers that often, so it takes a lot to get me to say that.
It does most of the best part right away is you get to mill 4 for your graveyard deck, and then you nuke theirs, so now we're completely imbalanced for resources. I have all the resources in my graveyard. You have none, and it's a Planeswalker, so it is attackable, but to search your library, you have to attack it now.
So it comes down pretty cheap, and it has that really cute chibi version too, so I'm not mad about that. There's also Rakdos Charm. This is a very cheap way to exile people's graveyards, but it also has a little bit more utility than that. You can have creatures ping their controllers, and there's one more mode that I don't remember.
It's the best one. Most of the time, you just shatter. You just play this as a 2-mana destroy target artifact. I would say you're probably using that 80% of the time, but it is nice to have an emergency mode if someone's graveyard is getting out of hand on your card that is already playable. So I've been higher on Rakdos Charm. I remember like 5 years ago, when I was a wee lad, I was lower on it, but now I'm higher on it.
Yeah, you were 6'5" back then, but
growing up is realizing Rakdos Charm has 2 relevant modes and a fun mode.
I have just been hit with a Rakdos Charm with the creatures pinging their controllers one too many times, and I've taken 15 to the face a couple times.
That mode is like 5%, but I swear to God, people play it like 95%.
It's pretty funny.
They just want to do that.
It's funny. It's one of the gotchas. You don't understand why people play Deflecting Palm.
It's
Not
true.
that I do, but like, it's for the gotcha moments, right?
It's not for me. Yeah,
Some people really like that.
I'll be exiling graveyards with it. We also have Deathrite Shaman. It's the best mana dork pretty much ever printed. And even if you're not like a fetch land, off-color fetch, high-power deck, I think you could still play this to just get, accumulate value over time, take out key instant sorceries or key creatures from their graveyards. It's a nice hate piece. It's a little slower than like a Scavenging Ooze in terms of like the number of things you get, but I think the effect is better. You get to gain life, or if you take out an instant or sorcery, they lose 2 each. That's 6 damage.
I mean, coming down instantly is super nice. You can save it as like a pseudo blocker if they try and punch you with the Esper Sentinel turn 2 because it has 2 butt, and just the fact that you can just activate it for a little bit more mana or just drain your opponents a tiny bit, it will stick around, I think, for the most part.
I mean, what more do you need to hear? Deathrite Shaman blocks Esper Sentinel. I mean, case closed.
Plus, it just got reprinted in the new Ravnica remastered set, so it is at a lower price.
The next thing on our checklist is the correct number of lands, not just lands, the correct number of lands. Why is this? Well, you want to know your curve and your typical first 3 turns. When you build a deck, kind of want to envision what the first thing you're going to do each game is. What do you want each hand to kind of look like?
I feel like when we play our decks, a lot of people always comment like how many 1 and 2 drops we have. I think we talked about this in a previous video, but it's always good to take advantage of those first few turns because a lot of people don't, and their decks are very mana hungry. But if your deck is mana hungry, you should really be aware of that so you know how many lands and mana sources you should be playing.
Yeah, if you're not playing a lot of lands in your deck, I think a question to ask is, can you win the late game if you get board wiped? Well, a lot of people we know, they like to play decks that are super greedy, and they're like, well, I've got 30 lands in this deck, or I've got 24 lands in this deck, and I'm just trying to get out on the first 5 turns, and my first 5 turns are going to be the best first 5 turns. And then a board wipe happens, and they just die. Not literally, they continue living, but they just kind of have 3 lands in play, and they never accomplish a single other thing in that game. And I think if you're playing too few lands, which is likely, it's possible, there's a lot of extra lands you can add that also have spell-like functions, so you don't have to just be screwed. You can play 35 lands in your deck and still have those first couple great turns, but then as the game goes on, instead of losing and never playing another spell, you can make 2 or 3 more land drops and get get going.
I feel like these pitfalls happen a lot in Kindred decks and decks that cheat mana. These are your decks like cheating things out like Kalias and Jaliras, and then also like your Elf Ball decks and the things that come down and produce mana in general. I feel like sometimes treasure decks struggle with this too because one artifact wipe and they're kind of just back to square one and they don't have enough after they've built up that advantage. But there are lands that you can play. One of these are the cycle of Throne of Eldraine castles. This is Ardenvale, Vantress, Lochthwain, Embereth, and Garenbrig. I mostly play Lochthwain out of all of these because it's nice to draw cards, but all of these have utility, especially if you are in one or two colors where you can utilize the extra pips in the bottom part to get that effect.
They all make flooding out less possible because they have spell-like effects as the game goes on. Most of them can help get you back in the game if you're behind. Embereth really wants you to be ahead, but it's still a nice effect that you can get on a land that makes me not feel bad playing 35 lands when I really wanted to play 30. There's also the Neon Dynasty Channel lands, which honestly are basically spells. They're like split cards because they're instant speed. We have a Ganjo for 4 damage, Otawara to bounce, Takanuma to mill and return something, Sokensan for a little bit of a board state, and Boseiju is the best one. You probably already played that one. It blows up artifacts, enchantments, or non-basic lands, and then they get a land in return. These lands are just fantastic. They are... If you have the budget for them, you should just be playing them, period, in every single 1 and 2 color deck. Maybe some 3s.
I love these. I wish I spec'd on them because we had an inkling about it, but these are so good. These are lands and spells. But if you want to talk about lands and spells, why don't we talk about MDFCs, specifically the mythic ones. There are some good ones at the uncommon level too, but we're mostly focusing on Emiria's Call, Seagate Restoration, Agadeem's Awakening, Shatterskull Smashing, and Turntimber Symbiosis. All of these have a home in your 1 and 2 colors, maybe even 3 color decks too, depending on what type of effect you're looking for.
Yeah, spells and lands. So when you are drawing when you're getting aggressive and drawing your great early game stuff, they are spells that can help get you ahead and do things. When you are behind and you got board wiped, they are now lands, so you can cast a 5-drop instead of losing the game.
These all come in untapped if you pay 3 life, but you're starting at 40, so you can easily play this in the early turns as lands and not have it hurt you. And the back are a fair amount. Agadeems and Shatterskull are a little bit kind of like, how much you pour into it is how much you get out of it, but the others are a fair amount of mana, but in the late game, they're not dead draws because you will have the 7 mana to cast them.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we also have some colorless lands that are worth considering. Just lands that I think will help you flood less, that you can cash in to do something with, instead of just throwing another mountain in your goblin deck and then being upset when you end up with 4 mountains and playing nothing else. There's like Roadside Reliquary. You can cash in for cards. You can get 2 cards off this later. I think this card's sweet, honestly.
Rogue's Passage is also another great one. I love this in like my poison decks and that sort, but it basically says a creature can't be blocked. That really matters if you have combat-based damage triggers or if you have squishy creatures that need to just attack to get their value, but you're afraid of them dying.
Yeah, War Room is a great one. If you have, oh no, I drew 1 too many or 2 too many lands, I'm not upset that one of those extra lands is War Room, because now it can just draw me an extra card and get me more things, whether they're lands or spells. It's super great.
3 mana is not a lot to pay in the late game when you're just top decking and you could really use 1 more card. There's also Commander's Beacon, not just for the Phage players, but this can really help just combat a little bit of that commander tax if your commander keeps getting shut down. There's some commanders that people really love to kill, so it helps to bring it back to your hand and just cast it for its original starting cost.
Yeah, if you're one of those players who likes to run out early and then get wiped and have a very hard time coming back later, Commander's Beacon is one of those ones that's an extra land you can put in your deck, helps you cast more spells, but has utility. After you get board wiped, you can cast your commander for 5 instead of 9, and you get another shot at the game.
There's also Buried Ruin. If you want to get back an artifact from your graveyard, you can get it back and just pay a little bit more mana, but it also functions as a land if you need it too until you get to that point.
Yeah, use it to cast your spells, and then when you need to rebuild, you can crack it, keep hitting your land drops because you have 35 sources in your deck, nice going, and then actually keep going with the game.
And the next thing that every commander needs is non-combat win conditions. This is your backup, your just in case. But why would you do that if you're playing like a Kindred deck or something like that? Some decks can just shut down combat forever. We've all been in a state where we're getting locked down by like a ghostly prison and a propaganda. And then there's like, glacial chasm.
Constant mists, yeah.
Yeah, we've played games where there were 3 fogs in a single game and combat damage is just not getting through. So having a backup plan is just a great way to make sure that the game tips in your favor, or at least just really starts snowballing heavily in your favor.
Yeah, if you're a creature-based deck that's trying to attack and get damage through, and you don't have some kind of over-the-top non-combat way to close out the game, I think your deck's very predictable, and that's going to hurt you. I know what I need to do. If I don't take damage from your creatures attacking me, I can't lose the game to you. And if that statement is true, I think you're in a lot of trouble because people will figure that out real quick. And some decks just have built-in ways 1 or 2 cards can just take you out because they say, oh, you just can't damage me unless you remove my land. It's like, well, how are you going to do that?
Yeah, there are some that really synergize with the decks themselves, like if they're stapled onto a certain creature type or just kind of incidental, which I think can really help just up your deck just a little bit more.
So we'd recommend at least between 1 and all the way up to maybe 3 non-combat ways to win. This could be like a package of cards or like a combo or something that says, I do not need to attack with creatures. I can shoot you from behind the safety of my untapped creatures. It's not as predictable. It's not as preventable. And it's going to help your deck be a little bit more cagey, a little bit less predictable, a little bit better.
It's your just in case, you don't want to be dead in the water. One of these is Test of Endurance. Basically says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 50 or more life, you win. You don't have to make your opponents lose to win.
Yeah, you could just be a control deck or something, sitting behind, gaining some life every once in a while, and all of a sudden you go, I guess I'll just win, and that's perfectly valid.
This is really great for all of the decks that have like free counter magic or something too, and you can just survive until your next upkeep, which is a very long time in Commander, but maybe your opponents don't run enough removal to get rid of this. There's also Laboratory Maniac, Lab Man, if you've heard us call him that. Basically, if you have an empty library, you win. And that is pretty easy to do if you're like milling yourself or you're drawing a ton of cards. You don't have to just play this with like Thoracle Demonic Consultation. You could just put this into a deck where you're drawing a bunch of cards or you're just putting your cards into your graveyard, and it can synergize very well there.
Yeah, it's like a self-mill backup plan. One that I like that's probably a little stronger in the self-mill backup plan category is Nexus of Fate. Because if I want to self-mill continuously, if I just keep doing that, I can actually just take infinite turns. And now the game has gone on long enough and you have not interacted with me long enough. I'm sorry, but I'm going to just take infinite turns and attack you with my things infinite times. And I think that's a pretty great way to stop games from going on too long as well. If it's just assemble board state, attack, board wipe, assemble board state, board wipe, assemble board state, attack, board wipe. This is how we get to the 3-hour games. But I think if there's like controls you can put into your deck and ways to do this that are like, all right, I've done my thing enough. I'm sorry, the game has to end. It's over.
There's also the staple of black decks, Grey Merchant of Asphodel, also known as Gary.
Same idea.
He comes down, he drains your opponents for a bunch of life, and you gain all that life back. If you can flicker him, that is super, super, like just so much value, and your opponents are going to be dead in no time. But there also are other effects like this in other types of decks. I play Malakir Blood Witch in Edgar, and that is a vampire that can also do something like that for the amount of vampires you have. So with this type of effect, it just shows that even though you might have a kindred deck or something like that, you can win with non-combat damage.
Yeah, and it's like the more clogged the board state and the less effective my creatures are at attacking, the better these cards are, because now there's more of them stuck in play, and I can actually scale it with the game and take you out in one shot. Zillipoor Cutthroat's kind of the opposite, where the more things that are dying now, maybe through board wipes or something, I can just say, you can't board wipe me. You lose if you do that. You take 13 damage.
The Blood Artists, the Meat Hooks, all of that, these just deal so much damage over the long run. Because if people don't see this coming, just one board wipe, even from you, could just wipe everything out and kill all of your opponents. There's also Perforos. If you're bringing in a bunch of things, and they just keep coming down left and right, you're making a ton of tokens. This will just ping your opponents, and pretty soon they'll be dead. Perforos decks are pretty fast.
Yeah, it's not I wouldn't say it's like this kill me now or die threat that, Laboratory Maniac or Grey Merchant could be, but it's like a consistent source of damage that absolutely will kill you if you let them untap maybe twice with it. It could be pretty threatening.
I mean, I think the point is that it's also indestructible.
It's a backup,
so
yeah.
Even if you can kill it, you have to kill it for real.
You have to kill. You can't just kill it. And now we're going to get demonetized. So head over to that Patreon.
Please.
We also have Dragon Tempest. This is an interesting one. It's for dragons, and you can lump in Terror of the Peaks and Scourge of Valkus. I think if you took out those 3 cards, every single dragon deck would be like half as scary to me. The thing that I worry about with dragons is not them just playing a 6-drop, a 6-drop, and a 6-drop. The thing I worry about is them just stacking dragons and then killing me before I can even attempt to remove their things or block, because there's just 8 dragons in play and they're all dealing 4 to me. This is always the scary part of dragons, is that they can, without combat, take you out.
Dragon Tempest is a really great card. I have it in Kaalia, which is not dedicated dragons, but it also gives all flying things haste. So not only can you attack immediately with your dragons, but you can also ping people as they come in, which is just like another giant source of damage. There's also Primal Surge, which basically says that you can keep flipping off the top, and if they're permanents, you put them into play. But so that really takes a certain type of deck that you have to build around. But if you play it, it's you slap your whole deck in, and I'm sure you have like a crossroads or something in there, and then they just swing for the win.
Yeah, if combat's not going to work, because this is technically non-combat, you're putting your entire deck in play. Any sort of Perforos, any sort of Zulapor Cutthroat Sack Outlet thing, you're going to win immediately as soon as this card resolves. So that's like probably the best green non-combat way. I mean, there's also like Helix Pinnacle. That's a little jankier.
You love Helix Pinnacle too.
I love it because it's bad.
But another way in green is Teamer Sabertooth, which basically is a combo piece that you can just bounce stuff to your hand infinitely if you have like a mana dork or something and keep playing it and then just generate infinite mana. This is like with Intruder Alarm, this is a really great one, or just any of those like 3-card combos where you can generate infinite mana or infinite ETB triggers and then just kill the table with that.
Yeah, you'll see this alongside like Selvala, the mono green one, a lot, because she can tap sometimes for like 7 mana, and if you have a way to give her haste and the Teamer Sabertooth, you can now bounce her, play her again, tap for 7, generate infinite mana that way, and then if you have the biggest creature in play, you can bounce that and recast it infinite times. Now, let's assume that doesn't even have an ETB. Selvala just draws you a card, so now you're drawing your entire deck, find a creature with an ETB, still have infinite mana, and then play, Ulamog, Ceaseless Hunger, and exile all their permanents.
It's so rough, but it's so good if you are a meta that is okay with playing combos like that. These are usually 3 or 4 card combos, so I'd say they're not as like win on the spot as like a 2 card. So your play group might be okay with playing combos like that.
But Teamer Saber, either way, it's a reliable non-combat way to win. It's also sometimes a way to stop board wipes, because if I just pass, what are you going to do? Wipe my board? I'll just bounce it, and then the Sabertooth is indestructible. Altar of Dimension is one of my favorites because it's a sack outlet, so it fuels your game plan. You can mill yourself, fuel your graveyard. But also, if you get enough power on board, someone is just dead, and it doesn't have anything to do with combat. There's almost no way to even stop this outside of 2 or 3 random cards that nobody plays. Like Ulamog, Ulamog, Infinite Gyre. If someone's playing that, you can't know them. But I've never even had that come up. I've never had it come up.
Altar of Dimension is so nice because it just insulates you from board wipes too, because it's like, okay, you'll kill all my stuff. Well, I guess I'll just get value before you do that too. So it's not as bad. The blow is not as harsh,
Altar of Dimension is funny because it's a card that you need graveyard hate. It's going to be one of those cards where if they're playing Altar, they're also going to play like Living Death or Rise Dark Realms or something. So you're going to have graveyard hate to battle against the Altar player. And then Aetherflux Reservoir. If you're a life gain deck or you're a Storm deck, this is like a staple. So I don't know if I have to explain it too much, but it is a way to say, I don't need to pump my Young Pyromancer tokens. I don't need to play Balmor. I just need to cast 5 spells in a turn and then kill you all one at a time.
It's so good, and it combos with Top and Citadel too. So if you do want to play combos, that's a pretty easy 3-card one to just, zap your opponents in the face for 50.
If you want more Commander tips, we can tell you what to cut to improve your Commander deck in this video.